welcome to my fireside. My name's Nannie Annie, and I'm going to share with you just one of the ghostly stories for this end of St Andrews. Now, in the days gone by, there was nae houses on the cliff side of the Scores between the castle and the monument. Just grassland, where sheep and cows grazed and bairns played. And at that time, just to the west of Buttswynd, on the cliff face, there was an opening to a dark and dingy cave. The locals, well, they were quite frightened of this cave. Some of them had gone inside. The entrance was just big enough for a man to squeeze in. But once inside, he would find himself in a great cavern with lots of passages going off it. And although a few folk had gone through that entrance, none had ever ventured along any of the passageways. They knew it by different names. Some folk called it the Jingling Cave. Others called it Jock's Coal Hole. Well, about this time, there lived out in Argyll Street an old wife called Maggie. She stayed in a wee two-bedroomed, two-roomed cottage. She lived in one room, and her son Davy and his wife and bairn lived in the other room. Now Davy, he was a giner to trade, and quite a good giner too, but he was also a piper. They say he was the best piper in the town, if no the hill of Fife. Even Maggie Lauder would have been pleased to listen to him. And Davy was a bit of a daredevil as well. And he would often be found in the pubs and alehouses of the town, making the rafters ring with his merry tunes. And he was also very interested in that cave. Some say he was a bit obsessed with it. Anyway, one night he found himself in the Castle Tavern, just a few doors up the road from here. They say it was the night of the Lammas Fair, when folk were gathering and drinking, and he was there with a crowd of his friends. And the conversation turned to the cave. And whether or no it was because he'd had just one dram too many, he found himself taking a bet. A bet that he would enter that cave playing his bagpipes at midnight on the next New Year's Eve. Well, in the months that passed between August and the New Year, his wife and his mother and some of his friends tried everything to talk Davy out of it. They told him it was a daft idea, and he shouldn't be making bets when he'd had a few drams. Even his friends said that they wouldn't have had it against him if he decided not to do it. After all, they'd all been drunk. But Davy was determined. He was determined to do it. It was a bet after all. A bet's a bet. And so he found himself that New Year's Eve, just before midnight, entering the cave, playing his pipes, watched by a crowd of his friends. And they were able to follow him, follow the sound of the pipes. under the Scores, under North Street, under Market Street. But when the sound reached the other side of Market Street, it stopped, and all went quiet. Well, Davy's friends thought that, well, he'd maybe stopped and he was coming back, so they rushed back to the entrance to the cave to wait for him to come out. But he never did. And somewhere, deep below the tune, are the white bones of Piper Davy, with his pipes lying by his side. Now, many folk tried to find him. Some of his friends went inside the cave, but nobody was brave enough to follow any of the passages. And so they never did find him. But his wife, she took to sitting on a rock by the entrance of the cave. And she would say she was waiting for Davy to come back. She was sure he would come back to her. And this went on week after week until eventually the poor lassie just lost her mind. And after that she would be found at all times of days, the day and night, in all kinds of weather, sitting on that boulder at the entrance to the cave, waiting for her Davy. And a year passed, a new year came round again, and that poor lassie, she wrapped herself up in her shawl and turned to her mother-in-law and says, "You look after the bairn, I'm awa' to Davy." And she left that night, and she too never come back again. And folks said that she had gone and found her Davy. And for many years after that, folk reported that on dark, stormy nights, when the moon was managing to force its way through the clouds, they would see the figure of a lassie, a shadowy figure, sitting on that rock, waiting for her Davy. And when they did see her, sounds of wild pipe music could be heard in the wind coming from the cave entrance. And then many, many years passed and the houses were built along the cliff top on the Scores. And folk that stayed there said that now and again we would see a piper marching back and forward where nae mortal should be able to stand, along where the cliffs used to be. And when he appeared, you would say he would be preceded by a cold, icy blast. That smothered piper with the West Cliffs.